It was nearly a perfect offseason for the Philadelphia 76ers. From handing Paul George a max contract in free agency to giving Tyrese Maxey the max extension he has earned, everything was according to plan except for Nico Batum electing to take his talents back to the West Coast and join the Los Angeles Clippers, the team that initially traded him to the Sixers in the first place. I want to talk about the hit that this was to the Sixers, as well as why they might have been closer to getting the deal done than we thought. And why I say that is we got this report here saying that the Sixers were, quote, really close to retaining Nicholas Batum this offseason before the 35-year-old elected to return to the Clippers, Tim Bontemp said on the Hoop Collective podcast. And the quote that was officially said by Tim is, quote, they were really close to getting Nick Batum back, and he was going back and forth between, at least my understanding of it, is going back to Philly or going back to the Clippers. And I think family played a part in it with him going back to the Clippers. He was pretty comfortable out in LA. And that is the biggest takeaway, the storyline here. This is a little bit bigger than basketball. That Batum was not a guy who was eager to be traded in the first place. There were a ton of whispers of him retiring last year before he was traded to the Sixers. I'm glad that that is not the case as a basketball fan, to be perfectly honest, because Batum still got some years left in the tank that he wants to. And I think he's had a pretty cool career arc as a player, a dude who at a point in time was a max contract guy in the NBA, that he signed a max deal back in the day with the Trailblazers out there. He's kind of had his role shift and has ended up as one of these really like ideal veterans that just adds to a team. And what specifically stood out in his skill set with the Sixers team, it was as an entry passer. What I mean by that is this exact pass right here, where he's able to get it to Joel Embiid on the block. That is such a useful pass that, particularly when building around a big man and with Joel Embiid in particular, the Sixers have struggled to get him these opportunities, and having Batum on the floor, being able to just execute that at a high level, was a difference maker for this team, and something that we saw more and more as the years went on. This is very essential to Joel Embiid getting his production. That as effective as he is in the mid-range as a shooter from deep, if you're not getting him the ball in the right spots, that's just the inherent difficulties that come with being a big man, and Batum being able to execute was a huge deal. That's also the same reason why it's no coincidence that Joel Embiid saw his uptick in scoring production when playing next to James Harden. Sure, the spacing was important. Sure, having another guy that the defense needed to worry about was important. But really, he was getting free points that he's just never had access to at other points in his career. That with the little pick and roll slips, the little just up over the top passes that Harden was able to execute with on an everyday basis, that was a big deal for Joel Embiid, and we saw him unlocked further. And Batum was a guy that was capable of doing a lot of the same things. And to pull up a couple numbers here, these are his stats with and without Joel Embiid this season. The top row being with Embiid and the bottom row being without. So as you can see, not a ton of difference in the overall production, 5.9 points to 5.1 points per game. A guy who didn't make his impact felt in the box score as a whole. But the assist number I did think was notable, 2.5 per game with Joel Embiid compared to just 1.8 without him. And the 3-point percentage I also thought was notable. 42.2% when playing next to the big fella versus just 37.9% without it. Embiid is a mutually beneficial relationship for players like Batum, where he helps them out, and Embiid, his gravity, the defensive attention that he commands, is very effective in creating better looks for them. So ultimately, it did warm my heart a little bit to see that Batum did give some hard consideration to coming back to Philadelphia. I do think that would have been a difference maker and a guy who would have played some pretty significant minutes on the Sixers team, but he still did help them out in the process. And one guy who could ultimately be replacing him as far as the role go is Gershon Yabusele, the guy who starred on the French team alongside Batum, and ultimately earned himself an NBA opportunity with the Sixers. And when speaking to media for the first time, Yabusele said that he thinks he's a great fit with the Sixers, and said that former Sixers and French natives Timothée Luwawu-Cabarrot, shout out, and Nico Batum spoke fondly of Philly. So I do like that Batum enjoyed his time here. He was a huge part of the Sixers team last year, and honestly was a guy who exceeded my expectations by a great deal, but ultimately we'll be rooting for him on the other side of the country to this point as we continue to kind of work our way through this bizarre Clippers and Sixers just parallel universe that we are in right now. Now, I do understand that as we look to next season, the Sixers aren't going to be just one Nico Batum away. That it's going to come down to guys like Paul George, who obviously is expected to be the true difference maker. That they are hopeful that a guy like Tyrese Maxey will take that next leap and continue to get better. And there's also additions like Caleb Martin that I don't want to fly under the radar. That certainly will make his impact felt. And he's a guy that I would probably say is the most clear-cut Nico Batum replacement there. But that's not a guy that, obviously there isn't a one-for-one for Batum's skill set here. But when looking at the depth chart for this Sixers team, I do think that the power forward conversation has been had a lot. That's been something we've talked about heavily on this channel, as well as just about every Sixers outlet. But really, what I think Batum shows more than anything is it's the playmaking that I think I could see becoming a slightly bigger deal for this Sixers team than people want to acknowledge. Now, when thinking about that starting lineup, which we ultimately expect, of course, to be Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Caleb Martin, and Joel Embiid. Yes, rebounding is an issue, but there's also who is the guy on that roster that is a true table-setting playmaker? Is it Tyrese Maxey, who I think I took some significant strides forward as an actual point guard last year and being a guy that can run an offense for others, not just scoring for himself? I do think he grew in that area, but he is a guy that I wouldn't say is still, an expert at it, or a guy that I consider a point guard first guy. That is why I do think it's important that Kyle Lowry did return. I think Jeff Doughton might be a guy who plays more of a role than people expect during the season, although he'll be a little bit buried on the two-way contract to start. But the bottom line is that there is a need for that. And that is an area where I thought Batum was very capable. A lot of the half-court sets were ran through him as the decision maker, where the type of play, such as this entry pass, which I will pull up again here, this was specifically designed to get the ball to Batum for Batum to be the decision maker within the offense. They opened the game with that a ton last year, where they would run some sort of horn set with ultimately Embiid and Batum kind of sitting at the elbows. Ball goes to Batum, little drop pass to Embiid. That was a pretty consistent part of the Sixers offense, and that is going to be something that needs to be replaced. So I am happy that there was an honest attempt to bring him back. That does make me feel a little bit better from the Daryl Morey perspective, but I think we all kind of saw what was the case there. This was a guy who never wanted to be traded to Philadelphia in the first place. To his credit, did play his heart out here and was an impactful player for this team, and now he can kind of head back and enjoy life on the West Coast as he seems to desire. So shout out to Nico Batum. Do appreciate you for leaving all out here, and let's not let it go unnoticed. In addition to all these entry passes, this is a guy who caught absolute fire in the playing game and really was the driving force for beating that Miami Heat team. I believe he had like 27 points or something along those lines, more than we expected anything close to in that game. And then in that Knicks series, which ultimately obviously the Sixers did lose, Batum was excellent guarding Jalen Brunson. So don't let that go under the radar. This was a guy that will be tough to replace. And now it's going to be a battle to see how things shake out. So I don't think there is a one-for-one flip for what is lost in Nico Batum, but I am excited to see how things break down for what is Caleb Martin's role, what's Gershon Yabusele's role, who are the other guys that are stepping in and trying to fill those minutes, and we are getting close to actually finding out the answers to this. We're less than a month until NBA basketball begins to kick up. Sixers Media Day in about 2 weeks now, and then training camp immediately following that. So we're going to have some actual on-court things to talk about in the near future. Cannot wait for that to be the case and want as many of you a part of it as well. So if you have not already, do make sure you are smashing that subscribe button. Still 66.6% of you guys have not subscribed to the channel that are tuning in the videos. So appreciate the support and for tuning in anyway. But let's get you a part of the Sixers Digest family completely. We're going to be ready to be hitting the ground running, having some more regular content on an everyday basis as the season is set to tip off. So make sure you're a part of it. Hit that button, drop a like, drop your comments, and I'll be talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.